us as they will.
Let's do it.
All right. Good evening. My name is Richard Barga. I am Vice President of Economic Development for Midtown Cleveland, and I am pleased to be here with my partner and colleague, Michael Elliott from Cleveland Neighborhood Progress, to bring you the second installment of what we are calling Real Estate 101, a introductory literacy course designed to help understand some of the complex nature of real estate and real estate development that's happening in the neighborhood around us and across the city.
Yeah.
This course really came out of a number of different community conversations that we've been having at Midtown around the changing neighborhood and trying to bring some common terminology and understanding to terms and processes around real estate. And I just couldn't be happier to have Michael join me in this session. If any one of you want to watch this session, it is being recorded and it'll be put on YouTube. The first session was also recorded and put on YouTube. So if you missed it, no problem. You can always check out our Midtown Cleveland channel on YouTube, and we'll send you out the link. But tonight we are going to be focusing on the development process and a number of different elements that we talk about a lot in the development process, specifically pre-development, construction, and operation. So let me turn it over to my partner, Michael, for introductions, and then we can advance the slide whenever you're ready.
All right. Well, it's a pleasure presenting with you, Barg, as well, too. Again, I remember our days in the city, and I'm glad that we're able to come together on this very important project. So, folks, thank you again for everyone who's joined and connecting with us. Again, we really want to provide an opportunity for everyone to kind of get a very high-level view or understanding of what the development process is all about, which is the topic for today. If we can go to the next slide. All right, so just to really quickly recap our last session. So in our last session, we talked about what is real estate. We talked about how real estate can do many things, but the two focus points that we were discussed last time was how community, by having real estate developers within our city, we're able to utilize their strengths, their assets, their knowledge, their expertise, to help improve the quality of life within the city of Cleveland, or any city for that particular matter. So we, as economic developers in the community development space, we really look at developers to help us basically utilize the passion that many developers bring to bring about community development. It's a tool that we work with developers to improve our neighborhoods so that they're attractive spaces where people can live, work, and play. But we also talked about how real estate is a financial asset for individuals. We talked about the importance of making sure that we understand that even though it is a safe risk, it's a risk nonetheless, and that as we look at many different tools that someone can invest in, real estate can be one of those tools that can help build wealth for an individual, as well as within a community. Lastly, we talked about who the key players are within the real estate industry. We talked about the importance of a lawyer, the importance and role that a contractor plays. We talked a little bit about the importance of financing and how that plays. One of the major things that we want everyone to get from this series is that the developer plays just one of many different, plays one position within a particular team of individuals who represent the real estate industry. So as we go through this particular process, as we go through this particular class or course, we want to make sure that everyone understands the importance of making sure you have the right team with you as you go through the development process. Next slide.
Great. So tonight we're going to focus on the development process. and understanding a number of different aspects to the different stages of development. As we think about a project, we were actually asked the question the other day, a person asked Michael and I to describe what was happening. How did this project come to be? And they were talking about a construction site that they were seeing under construction down the street. And I said, well, there are a lot of different steps that happen before the construction process actually begins. And we call that entire stage pre-development. And so a lot of the different aspects of pre-development involve taking a look at your site, taking a look at the type of project that you want to do, taking a look at and analyzing the market that you are in, and looking at all the different things that you need to do to navigate the public review process. So here you'll see a list of different things that I'm going to cover in a few minutes, but to understand there is a lot of upfront work that goes in before any shovels go in the ground or anyone starts doing any construction. Construction is the first thing that a neighbor or a person on the street might see, but that process is pretty straightforward. We'll cover that as well. A number of different players, as Michael was alluding to a minute ago, take part in that. And then once the construction is over, we talk about the idea of a third phase and really the lease up period and operation period, where a building is going to be rented up or try to figure out how to manage a property after the construction period is over. Next slide.
So we're going to really focus on this development process because it is so important that if you're looking to get into the real estate game, that again, it's not all about kind of what you see, but it's a process even before the shovel hits the ground. So as you can see with this particular chart here, everything kind of flows into one another. The pre-development or any part of this process is all about mitigating risk. If you can mitigate risk, the construction in the pre-development phase, you can also help make sure you're mitigating risk within the construction phase, as well as the lease up and property management stage. Now, from my experience, and I think you probably would agree, Barga, when we were working at the city, a lot of individuals usually come to us and all they usually probably do is just the site selection, if they did that well, and the acquisition of the building. And what we're finding out is when these individuals who come to us and say, hey, we need some type of financing, or in our case with the city of Cleveland, we're providing a lot of gap financing, we would begin to ask a lot of questions of the business owner, trying to figure out where are they in this kind of due diligence process. So a lot of times, yes, they may acquire the building, but usually they don't do it with a broker, for example. Or they might do some due diligence, but it's not as thorough because they didn't involve a lawyer or a surveyor. Or they come to us looking for financing, but they don't have any money for themselves to put into the actual project. So it's very critical that if you're looking to get into the development game, making sure that pre-development is first and foremost doing all the due diligence you can possibly do. And then, again, it all flows into everything else. So if you do your due diligence well, then the construction process can go a lot easier. Again, it doesn't eliminate any risk, but it does help to mitigate risk from happening. So in the construction phase, you're going to have to figure out, can I do it myself or do I need to hire a general contractor? If I do it myself, do I have that expertise? Now, if you bring on a general contractor, and we'll talk about this a little bit later, that general contractor can do all the other work as far as hiring the subcontractors. And then if you do the construction phase right, then that can lead up to mitigating risk involved in the lease up and property management phase as well too. So this process, this might be the most important slide out of the whole series. It gives you a very high level view of what the development process is. And it's just very, 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 very important that you get that pre-development process down pat. Next slide.
Thanks, Michael. That was a perfect lead-in to thinking about what I consider to be some really essential questions when you're thinking about pre-development. And this period, we have this little graphic on the side that says site, tenant, knowledge, and money. And this really starts to tease out the questions that you really want to be asking yourself. And maybe if you're, if you're a single family home developer, or you want to buy and flip houses, you've already started to think about these questions. But essentially, you really have to break it down to the very bare bones and say, okay, well, what are you building? Because there are different types you could build a lot of different types of buildings that are out there. A retail store is a lot different than an industrial building. A single family home is different than, a park so really understanding what we call your asset type. And so if you were to want to, and there are different forums and many different types of reports that you can look up on these specific types of assets. So that's number one. Where are you planning to build? And what do you know specifically about the market and the submarket? And we talk about the market in Northeast Ohio, for example, in the office industry. The Northeast Ohio has office buildings in every city and many different neighborhoods across the area. But specifically, what do you know about an office building in Midtown or in St. Clair Superior? That's what do you want to know about the office market as a whole, and then specifically about your neighborhood. So where are you planning is really important. Do you have tenants in place? Another question, when somebody buys a building, you may buy a building that has an existing tenant in it. The tenant's lease may extend throughout the purchase period, and you could end up with a tenant who is going to just pay you rent all the way, and you don't even have to do anything. So, one thing that I have here that says tip, starting small with lower risk. You're thinking about a building that already has tenants in it is already generating rent, and that's good for the return on your investment, right? If you buy a building that is vacant and you don't have anybody renting it, then you might have a cash flow issue. So knowing whether you have tenants in place is an important question to ask in the beginning of any process. And then, how do you plan to finance this building or this project? Are you going to be using debt? Are you going to be going to the bank to get a loan? Or do you have equity in the form of cash to pay a seller or to do a development project? And generally, there's a mix of both. You can have a lot of residential homes have debt and equity on them. Sometimes you see deals that are done on straight equity, where you hear about all the time, like a seller was offered cash straight for a property. Done. That's and so understanding how much money you have or how you plan to finance the transaction becomes important. And then, what's your strategy here? Are you thinking about a building or a property as just to acquire it, to buy it, to redevelop it, or to build on it, or are you thinking about it as what we call like a flip or a hold, right? Are you buying it because it's an investment and you know that somebody's going to pay you more money for it? Or are you planning on buying it and holding the property over a long time? So thinking about those type of questions really needs, is tantamount to getting the process going. All right, next slide, please. So if we were in person, you might, I'd be at a blackboard or at a drawing board, but I'd love to just pose this question to everyone, if you can, in the chat. What do you think makes a good site or a piece of property and we can take a look at the chat over here and see if anybody's got any comments. By the way, we'd love to do these sessions in person someday, and we hope that we can. I don't know, is the chat enabled for everyone, Alex? I wonder if, oh, no environmental hazards. That's yes, that's a very important
That's very important.
piece. Future growth opportunities. Probably depends on what you are building. Yep. Those are all really good comments. All right, so we wanted to move on to sort of like some aspects of a site that you should be considering when determining whether or not you have a site. So if you go on to the next slide, please. Michael, go ahead.
So these are some great examples that were put in the chat. So thank you very much for providing those insights. Here's a few things. Of course, it's not limited to these, but again, we'll touch on some very high level qualities of a good site. So visibility is very important. And like someone said in the chat, it really does depend on what you're building. So for example, if you're building real estate, visibility to the Lake Erie, for those who like to see the lake or the water, might be look different as far as when it comes to attracting a commercial space. Some folks may have, if you look at commercial space, access to the water, depending on what type of business you're trying to attract, may not even be something that's on the top 20 things that they want out of a site. So visibility is very key when you're selecting a site. Novelty, one thing that I've noticed within Cleveland is a lot of individuals are all about historical preservation. So that might be important as far as when it comes to selecting a site. You might be a developer that is very important to you. So you want to make sure identifying sites that are historic in nature so that you can leverage resources to preserve those. Access. So if you're doing a commercial site, for example, access to the highways might be very, very important when it comes to commercial industry businesses that you're trying to attract. Proximity to other development. So one of the things that I've noticed about developers, they want to build off momentum that's already gathered within the city of Cleveland. Recently, maybe the last year and a half, maybe a year ago, city of Cleveland developed Glen Village. That was a site that was heavily sponsored by the city of Cleveland. It built on existing momentum with the VA hospital and a lot of the museums in the particular area. And then lastly, and somebody also mentioned this as well too, Cleveland is challenged because we are a historic Rust Belt city with a lot of factory industries back in decades ago. We struggle with when it comes to brownfields. So if you're looking to develop in major metropolitan areas in this particular part of the United States, brownfields is a big thing. And so when you're looking for a site, you have to understand that, hey, how do I make sure that as I invest in this particular location, I'm making sure that I can cut as many costs as possible. If someone wants to develop a place in the city of Cleveland, they have to make sure they're doing those environmental work that somebody mentioned within the chat here. So again, good sites have these, but other types of qualities to make them attractive to a developer. Next slide.
Thanks so much. Okay, great. So, one of the specifically thinking about a building, if you were considering purchasing it, you want to know sort of your basic specs on the building. We think about size, how big is a building, but actually buildings are then classified by a number of different aspects that sort of cut down on the amount of space that can be used. So the gross, when you think about the gross square footage, you are talking about the total size of the entire building, right? But then if you squeeze that down a little bit less into the rentable square footage, this is the space that you actually can charge for rent. You remove the elevator shafts, you remove the utility rooms, you remove, some of the other like storage spaces. Then you start thinking about, okay, well, this is the amount of rentable square feet that is in this building. And then if maybe you have a lobby, maybe you have some other, some other space that is considered shared space, you would say that is the usable square feet within the building. So, typically when we look at properties, we're talking about them in terms of gross square footage and rentable square footage. And that's what developers really want to know, is that rentable square footage. How much room do they have to charge for rent? The other really important thing about a building and thinking about a building is, how old is it? Obviously buildings that are 100 years old have a lot different life expectancy than buildings that were built yesterday. So understanding, the age of buildings, there are different historic designations. In Cleveland, there are many different historic landmarks. There are historic neighborhoods. Does your building fall in any of those neighborhoods or areas is really important. But then also, and we talk about this a lot, is that buildings built before 1980 may have some type of lead paint or asbestos issues. So you really want to be careful if you're buying buildings that haven't been remediated for lead and asbestos paint. In Cleveland, we deal a lot with the parking issue. In other cities, maybe like in New York City, it might not be as important, but in Cleveland, people are always concerned about how much parking is available, the number of spaces, the access to street parking. So you may want to consider that. And then other general things about a building: how many floors and how many units are in a building will come and help you be able to calculate later on, using dollar signs for rent, understand how much you can charge and how much you can make in a month on your rent roll. And then whether there's elevators, docks, ceiling heights, building systems, these are all sort of really important if you're talking about industrial property, but may not be relevant when you're talking about residential properties. So going back to that concept of knowing what you're trying to build is important. So keeping all of these things in mind. Next slide.
Knowing what you want to build is very important when it comes to zoning. So here's a true story. When I was working at the city of Cleveland, had and I'll call that person a developer. Anyone, again, who's taking on risk by purchasing real estate, I would call them in a general sense a developer. So this individual, out of his own money, he worked hard, saved up a lot of cash, did not get any kind of financing for this particular building that he purchased. He was doing some of the work himself. He had a kind of a vision for what this potential building can do. So he came to us, City of Cleveland, and he said, hey, we'll look at some financing for the development project. So I'm sure we'll definitely see what we can do. We began to look at his project and see that, some of the uses or planned uses didn't fit within the zoning code. So, as we discussed with him as far as, hey, were you aware of X, Y, and Z? And he wasn't aware. He thought that, hey, I can just start up these kind of businesses in this particular area, and he wouldn't have any problem. So one of the things that Barg and I and many folks within the city of Cleveland has to do is do some education around the importance of zoning. Basic zoning is the process of dividing land into land in a municipality into zones in which certain land uses are permitted or prohibited. A lot of the planners within the city of Cleveland do this work. They basically help the city and municipality kind of plan out what areas are kind of zoned for particular areas, leveraging their expertise and their insights. Each property will be zoned to allow for a particular use, either expressly or conditionally by a local municipality, and other uses will be prohibited. So you want to make sure that before you start a development process, again, this is all about that due diligence, that you're making sure that whatever vision that you have or whatever kind of tenants that you want to attract, you want to make sure that you speak with anyone, the zoning department or the planning department within the city that you reside in or want to develop in, to make sure that area is whatever you're planning to do is zoned for that particular use. Some other last thing is restrictions will often include things such as height limits, property setbacks, and outdoor area ratios, for example. And these are critical to understanding whether your desired building can be legally built. So don't make the mistake of the individual I was working with. Again, investing a lot of time, a lot of money, and what you believe is great for the neighborhood. And though it might be needed, if it's not zoned for that particular use, you might run into a lot of issues and problems down the road. Quite frankly, your whole project could be completely stopped until you seek the proper variances and requirements for that particular set of uses. Next slide.
And I'd also note that
Yeah,
we're going to spend a lot of time in the next session just on zoning to understand sort of the history of how it came to be, what are the different types of uses, and speak much more about it. So, okay, but just thinking a little bit more about pre-development and site selection. I see there's a question. We'll come back to questions here in a second. When we'll take a quick break for questions. I should have noted that at the beginning. Thinking about pre-development, another thing that you really want to get your hands on is how much is this property worth, and assessing price. And these are, there is an idea that a building is worth as much as somebody is willing to pay for. And if you have a willing buyer and a willing seller and you've agreed upon a price, that is the value of the building. Now, what you want to ask yourself is, before you get to that question, is that price in line with the market? So what I mean by that is, if there are 5 homes for sale on your block and they all go for $150,000, and the last house is listed at $250,000, is that price in line with the market? I would argue no. And I would say that you might be potentially grossly overpaying for that property. So thinking about finding recently sold properties similar to your target, and adjusting accordingly, up or down based on any differences. So, this is really the art of the appraisal, and figuring out, taking 5 properties, looking at all the different conditions, the history, the building systems, the neighborhood, figuring out, what is in line, or what is your potential purchase price. The second thing you should really be asking yourself is, what is the maximum price you want to pay so that you can expect the proper return? You can pay whatever you want, but there might be more ongoing costs that you are going to have to pay down the road. And that is going to hurt your bottom line. We're going to talk a little bit more about this in session 4, but this is a concept of sort of understanding what are the ongoing property maintenance costs, and how does that play into your expected revenue or your income that you can generate from a building. And then lastly, how much money do you have? Can you pay $250,000 for that house? Do you need to go borrow some money? This is always just sort of like, what is your own financial capacity to make these deals? And do you want to take on debt versus do you want to pay cash? A lot of that is an individual basis, and thinking about each individual property. So, okay, great. Let's move on.
All right, so one of the jobs we as economic developers, whether it's a CDC or someone that works within the Department of Economic Development within a particular municipality, we are trying to do our best to help market our particular neighborhoods or in general cities as attractive places to gain more support from developers or interest of developers. So for the market potential that we're trying to increase, evaluation of neighborhoods are more likely to be driven by changes in locations, market potential. So in other words, location is key. I'm sure we all heard that before as far as the importance of making sure that you're landing in the right place, whether that is residential, commercial, industrial. You want to make sure that location is the key. Another thing is we want to talk about is just existing tenants in general. We talked a little bit about that before, just making sure that when you're evaluating or looking at a particular property that has existing tenants, make sure you're taking a look at the terms and conditions of that existing lease. Before you make that investment, especially if you have a vision for the property, you may want to not bother too much with those paying tenants in that particular area. So be careful of that. As well as property conditions like soil conditions, environmental issues, age of systems. You want to make sure that as you select a site and look at it, that you're kind of kicking around the tires, making sure that, again, you're not getting into a bad investment that, it might not be obvious up front, but you want to make sure that you're looking deeper under the hood, figuratively speaking here, as far as making sure it's a good investment for yourself. Next slide.
And then I want to tie this a little bit back to the discussion last time about all these different financial investments. And, we from the ground as the CDC network and individuals in Cleveland really think about real estate as a place-based development strategy. And this idea that we are looking at a particular property and we are looking at a particular piece of land and trying to develop it to its highest and best use. There is a much from a 100,000 foot view. These different industry sectors may look at the same piece of property and value it based on how different industries are performing. So you can see this is not sure what year this was, but data centers here are creating better returns than shopping centers. So that's probably pretty recently. About the different rates of returns that you can expect based on the market segment or the industry that you are in. So this is, there are many different ways to look at real estate. And like I said, we're on the ground in Cleveland looking at properties in Euclid Avenue, but Wall Street traders and investment funds, in New York or in Chicago, look at the industries that they are investing in and aren't necessarily taking into account what we see on the ground. Next slide. Okay, so that was a lot. We're a little behind, but let's pause for questions. I think we'll skip an actual break, but if people have questions, feel free to pop them in the chat. Let me look over here at this question here. What is the difference between expressly and conditionally? I assume that this was in reference to the zoning conversation, and so this idea of a conditional use or conditional or permitted conditionally. We'll talk about this next session, but it really is the idea that it's like an exception that allows you to use your property in like what's called a non-conforming way, or something that is outside of the allowed zoning. And the zoning code that gets set up, that says like, okay, this neighborhood is residential homes. You can't put an industrial factory in this zone, but maybe you can convince the town council or the building department, the planning department to give you a conditional use permit, or to give you that type of to let you build that factory. We don't want to build any factories in residential neighborhoods. That's just an example. So
no, we don't.
All right, let's see. We got another one here in the chat. How valuable is a market analysis when selecting a site? Michael?
Critical, especially when you're talking about investors being a part of this. Again, part of that team. Again, this is a risk that we're taking on. And so you want to make sure that as you analyze the market and actually find out what is actually going to be of value in that particular area. If I want to build a restaurant in a particular area, you want to make sure that the market research actually reflects or shows that, yes, it would be a good investment to put a restaurant in a particular area. So as you look and searching for sites or areas to do investment, you got to do pre-development work as far as making sure that the analysis, the market analysis is actually going to basically help you tell the story of why it's worth making an investment of whatever that is that you're trying to invest in a particular area.
That's a great example using the restaurant. Let me jump to this question. Does it usually make more sense financially to take on debt than to pay outright in cash, even if you have the cash, when you consider return on equity? Okay, so complicated question here. What I would say is that you really want to understand your cash flows that are going to be driving your return on equity, right? So not just the purchasing of the property or the rehab costs that you're going to take on the property, how much rent you are being charged or that you can charge for your property that's going to bring in cash into your pocket, versus how much debt or what is the debt service that you're going to have to pay, because debt can come in all different forms. You know, you can get a 1% loan, you can get a 10% loan, you can get a 10-year term or a 30-year term. So you're trying to think about the different types of debt mechanisms that are out there, and you can get a number of different loans. The question is, when you put all that together in a formula, how does that, does it make more sense to take on debt versus buying in cash? You really have to know a few more things as you're figuring out that calculation.
I'll also say that developers that I've spoken to over the years, they are really trying to figure out how much. I do not want to put a lot of money in a project, especially my own money. And so they're trying to find every way possible to see if they can leverage their dollars, whatever that might be, to attract other dollars towards the project, whether that's getting another investor in so they can put their own cash in it, or leveraging their money in the project to get certain type of tax benefits or lending dollars. But from my experience, most developers are saying, look, I'm trying to pay as little as I possibly can so that I can go maybe take that money, my other cash, and maybe go put into another project in maybe a different kind of market, for example.
I promise you, if you come back to session 4, we're going to talk more about this. Very complicated question. But to Michael's point, developers, they take risk and they have their own type of risk threshold. So, like, I'm not going out there and buying buildings because I don't have financial wherewithal to put myself at risk like that. And I can't take that. I don't have that type of, war chest of funds. A different person might, and this idea of leveraging debt and cash is a little bit complicated. So great question. We're getting into some really good topics though, and I'm excited about where this is going. All right, so let's jump into a little bit of an example. Let's think about I'd love for you to pop in the chat any comments that you have here. This is a building on East 89th Street, just a little bit north of Euclid Avenue. I'd love to know first, what do you see when you look at this building? And then we're going to talk about what does a developer see, and some of the questions that developers ask when they are thinking about the property. So, any comments yet? Anybody got any thoughts on what do you see when you look at this building? Vacant house, unsafe. All right. Okay, good. Vacant next to it. talks a little bit about maybe the submarket or where it's at. Anybody else got any other thoughts? Historic. Good question. Good question. Building with tremendous repairs needed. Possible good site location. Is great analysis. All right, let's go on. Let's. These are great comments. Let's go on to the next slide and talk about. If I'm a developer and I'm looking at that property, the essential. There are basically 5 essential questions that I want to ask myself, and they talk about this idea of a back of the envelope calculations. And you start thinking about how much does the property cost? How many apartments are in there? How much can you rent these units at? How much money do you have? And how much money do you need to spend on fixing them up? And those are all the dollar signs we went back to in the previous session. This is about dollars and cents. It might be a possible good site location, a lot of repairs needed. Is it a historic building? Maybe, but let's talk dollars and cents. Next slide.
So yeah, when I see that, I do see, as someone mentioned, I see a lot of repairs needed. So as it relates to how much does a property cost, I want to make sure I'm getting that as low as possible. So there's many different ways you can actually find out, and we're going to go in a little bit detail. We got LoopNet, for example, that can provide you some insight about how much or the historic cost for this building is. You got Zillow that can provide some free and paid for services to help you find. You can call around and maybe call the city or maybe your community development corporation to provide you some insights about how much this particular building costs. You want to make sure you're comparing it against other properties around the area in similar conditions. You do not, as a developer, want to spend too much money, especially knowing going in that it's going to be a lot of costs. So there's just some insights there, and then we can go to the next slide.
And then there's a wonderful resource that the county auditor provides for free, a website which we'll send out in a link after this, where you can look up any property in the county using GIS and a number of different identification tools, whether it's by owner, by address, or by parcel number, and look up actually what is this, what does the county value this property at? And look at the history of the property, and it can tell you some interesting things. If you go on to the next slide, you can also, on this website with the county auditor, you can get a lot of different information about that building. So that building that we're talking about, this is that property on East 89th Street. So we can find out how many units are in this building, how old is the building, what was it's a little small on my screen, but there's lots of different information, free information here that can help you start to paint your picture. Next slide.
So how much can you charge for rent in that particular building? So taking into consideration that, again, let's just assume that you got a real good deal on the purchase price. Let's assume that the construction, though a lot, still makes sense as far as when you compare it to other buildings in the particular area. You're going to use that information plus a lot of other data that you're going to have about the project to determine, like the construction, and we'll talk about that a little bit later, to determine how much to charge for that rent. Now, the yellow spot is our building that we're looking at for this particular example. And the blue areas are similar properties that we're going to take a look at as far as how much they can be potentially charging for rent. Again, you want to make sure that you're charging enough that's going to, offset the cost it's going to take to acquire the building, construction of the building, as well as maintenance, ongoing maintenance. So you want to make sure you're doing it in a way that's going to be competitive in the particular area. Too much of those, you might forcing yourself to have to charge a lot for rent, which might knock your particular building or your rental space out of the market, and nobody wants to move in if they know they can get a more competitive price somewhere else. But I can also say that, going back to that map, can we go back to that map one more? There was another point that I wanted to bring out. Take a look at where it's located as well, too. Again, we're in the University Circle, Huff area. We're by some amenities as well, too. And so as you're thinking about how much to charge for rent as well, you want to take a look at the surrounding area. Some locations might be next to a job hub. Some locations might be next to a highway. So those are kind of things that you're going to have to factor in when you want to look at rent. Next slide now. Thank you. So we're looking at comparative rents in other areas. So for this particular area, we're looking at around $615 per month. So again, you want to ask yourself, what kind of return do I have? You want to ask yourself how much it costs to do the construction, how much did it cost to do the acquisition, and what do I think or expect would be the maintenance costs to keep this place up? One of the things we talked about in the radio station when we're promoting the workshop is this is just not like passive income. A lot of folks think about real estate as passive income. It's not truly passive income. You're always going to have to do something to the property to make sure that it's being kept up. So in this particular case, similar rents are around $615. So when you're thinking about investing in a property like this, you want to make sure, counting all the costs and factors it takes, can I charge this rent to make sure it's competitive in this particular market? Next slide. You also want to look at how much you want to spend on construction to fix it up. Again, that's going to play a part in how much you're going to charge for the rent as well. Too much, again, you might have to force that price up. As I stated before, it might make your particular property uncompetitive, but at the same time, you don't want to go too cheap with the particular construction costs as well too. If the particular market wants, I don't know, countertops that's made out of marble, you want to make sure that your particular site has that if all the other sites in your area has marble countertops, for example. So making sure that construction is locked down, you want to make sure, and we'll talk about this a little bit later, want to make sure you find the right construction partner or GC who's going to help you figure out and make sure you get the best deal for the property cost. Next slide.
Okay, so all of these different aspects of coming up with that information are free. And you can go to all these different websites, and we're going to send you this deck, and you're going to get all these sites. But this is how, you know, Michael and I dive into these projects to understand whether the prices are in line with the neighborhood, whether they are, you know, what is the market saying about the retail industry, for example, how many people walk, what's the walk score, or how pedestrian friendly is one neighborhood compared to another. And so all of these are free resources that are already out there to tell you how much properties are worth or how much buildings are being sold for. So we're happy to, we want to share this information with everyone. Next slide. All right. And so before you go into the actual construction phase of the project, say, okay, we've got all of these things, we've decided, we're going to buy this building, it needs some work, we've got an agreement with the seller, there's a legal structure that all these projects go through to when they actually transfer from the seller to the buyer. We'll talk about this flow chart a little bit more in session 3 about how, what are the parties and who's involved in that process. And next slide.
All right, we're going to go back a little bit more into construction. So when you're looking at the particular building, as somebody already pointed out, there's going to be a lot of work that needs to be done. And if you're like me, I have no idea how to even sometimes even nail a board together correctly, let alone trying to take on a major project like that. So again, as we talked about earlier, it's important that you have a great team around you of individuals who have experience in construction, whether it's residential, commercial, industrial. You want to make sure you have a good team and ask yourself the question, how much money, again, do I want to spend on the construction phase of this project? So many, especially for projects like that, want to hire a GC. GC is basically that company that will come and work with you to hire all the subcontractors. They'll make sure that the electricians are put in place, the roofers, the plumbing. They should have the expertise to make sure they have the right individuals who are going to come and make sure that you do a job that is as much as possible under budget, which we'll go and talk about a little bit in the next slide. So in this particular phase of the the development process, there's a lot of risks that are involved. Again, a lot of activity. So we got site acquisition, we got complete final design, bid construction or selecting the contractor. We have construction, the actual construction itself, and then completion of pre-leasing. All of these aspects or activities have its own unique risks. So for example, we have a lot of money that's going to probably be invested in this particular building. So we want to make sure that we're doing all the due diligence possible to make sure that we're not going over budget. Again, construction completion risk. Barg and I had many situations where projects start at the city of Cleveland, and unfortunately, for some particular reason, they can't be completed, or unfortunately, they're being done so over budget, what goes onto the unexpected costs. Pretty much guarantee that it's probably going to be over budget in many cases. And that's why many contractors and developers build in kind of contingency amounts within their particular construction. Basically, if there's any kind of cost of cost overruns, there's some built-in cushion within the project to make sure that it doesn't get too out of hand. Then there's lease up risk. There's possibility that as you try to negotiate contracts with tenants, that can go south. Again, putting a little wrench in the entire process. And then takeout financing. Keep in mind that a lot of times when you're getting a construction loan, it's just specifically for the construction. There's usually a very short time period, like the period of construction, which that term for that particular loan, the expectation is that that construction loan is going to be taken up by a finance company that will term it all out at a longer period. There could be issues with that. So again, all the due diligence is needed up front to make sure that, again, that you're mitigating risk on your construction project. Next slide.
Great, thanks for sticking with us, guys. This is it's a long presentation, but we're almost there, I promise. The last phase that we want to touch on here is about stabilization. So you can see stabilization really becomes the financial mechanism to be predictable, where people dive into the numbers and create spreadsheets where they are accounting for their tenants, their lease dates, how much rent they are paying, which gives them an idea of how much cash flow can be budgeted for month to month to month, and then year to year to year. And so all of this, the understanding is really stabilization is when these properties become occupied and the management phase really takes over. Next slide. And again, here's just a few different types of activities that are happening during stabilization. As you can see, occupancy, rent collection, property management, repairs and maintenance, financial management, and releasing. So all of those different aspects of a property once it has reached stabilization. So you can tell from the presentation how much Michael and I put emphasis on the due diligence phase of pre-development before you even get here. It's really the aspects of pre-development lay the foundation for everything that you see in construction and in stabilization. Next slide. All right, we've come to the end. So let's take a break, pause for questions here, and give a chance for some wrap up. Feel free to pop stuff in the chat, or there was open some other questions. You have 400 questions. Great. Well, I feel like you could definitely email me at, yes, there is more to come on financing in future sessions. Okay, Alex, move us to the next slide. Let's talk about what's coming up. Okay, so we have 2 more sessions left. The next session is going to be on transactions, ownership, and law, and really understanding these are the legal arrangements between buying and selling real estate, and the zoning questions, because there's always tons of questions about zoning. And then in session 4, we want to try to get into financing and risk assessment. And so the ideas around debt and equity will be explained more. The ideas about cash flows, understanding incomes over expenses, and the science and the math behind putting these deals together. We're going to try to get into that a little bit. And so we hope that you'll stick around for more sessions. That's the tagline. June 17th at 6 p.m. Put it down in your calendar. You'll get a reminder email. How do you navigate finding a tenant and tenants for space you don't have yet in order to convince a lender to give you money to get space? A bit of a conundrum. Yes, I mean, 100%. This is a huge part of financing. Lenders want to see committed tenants. So they want to see that they are going to give you money that is going to pay them, and you are going to have a way to pay them back, to pay off your loan. So how do you navigate finding tenants? We could talk a little bit about brokers and how helpful brokers are. As a CDC, and it is our mission for buildings in the neighborhood in Midtown to help tenants look for spaces, to understand different companies' site requirements, and help try to find, make good matches between tenants and landlords. So feel free to contact me after this, Alex. I'm happy to talk to you about finding tenants for spaces. Okay, let's see. Any other questions? Let's see. Can you say a little bit more? Okay, I got stuff in the chat and in questions and answers. Okay, is there more? Can you say more about the role of Midtown in helping new people to this world? Well, I'd say that this is our first step into really talking about real estate development, and trying to get these processes out from under the dark rocks that they have been in. And we talked in the last session about how this has sort of been a secretive industry, and that real estate development has been traditionally run by bankers and landowners who have been white and rich and landowning. And so, as we've been thinking more and more about equity, more and more about the role of the CDC in this theater of real estate, what we are trying to do is provide the information to give people the basic literacy to get off the ground and start to think about it. Real estate development is happening everywhere. And so the question about, what's happening at this construction site misses all of those pre-development questions about how people think about real estate and the financial arrangements. So, it's the goal of Michael and I, and myself from Neighborhood Progress and from Midtown, to start these conversations, to be able to have those with the community, so that the community can start thinking about those processes themselves.
There's a big need to have developers that have a very community-minded focus, and that's what CDCs really want to drive home, that, we represent the residents and their needs, and we want developers that can help us really connect with the neighbors, residents, to see what the needs are within a particular area. We're looking forward to these future sessions.
Okay, great. So this is what I was told to say by my social media professionals. Follow us on YouTube. Follow us on Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, and LinkedIn. We have pages on Midtown for all that. We will be happy to get all our contact information out. Next week, Midtown is hosting Innovation Intersections, May 27th, with John Nottingham from Nottingham Spurk, hosted by Tegan Horton. It's a lunchtime brown bag type of a talk about innovation and how innovation is happening in our community. I want to just say thank you to everyone for joining us. RSVP here, Innovation Intersections. Thank you, Karis, for typing that in. Michael, I think this has been a great session. We're right at 7 o'clock. You want to take us out?
Yeah, thank you everyone for joining. Please join us for the last two sessions. And after this session, we're going to be looking to see how we can really attract more individuals like yourselves to the CDC and development world. So thank you, everyone.
Thanks.
Have a great evening.
Good night.